Arthur Harrison pulled the simple, worn hat lower on his brow. The wool coat felt rough against his neck, very different from his usual tailored suits. Today, he was not Mr. Harrison, the chief executive officer of the entire Harrison's fine goods department store chain. He was just Arthur, an older man hoping to buy a small gift. He stood across the street, looking at the flagship store, the one his own grandfather had opened almost 60 years ago. The bright, polished glass doors reflected the sunlight, and the window displays were full of expensive bags and shining jewels. A deep sadness settled in his heart. This visit was necessary. For the past month, his private office had received letters. They were not angry emails, but handwritten notes from loyal customers, some of whom had shopped there for decades. The letters all said the same thing. The store had lost its kindness. They spoke of arrogant staff, cold treatment, and a feeling of being judged. Arthur had to see the truth for himself. Inside the grand entrance, Clara Vance, the store manager, stood with her arms crossed. Her suit was expensive, and her expression was severe. She watched the doorway, carefully observing every person who entered. Clara believed the store's reputation depended on wealthy clients. She despised casual shoppers and anyone who looked like they could not afford the best items. She saw her job as protecting the store's exclusive atmosphere. Arthur watched her for a moment. He had promoted Clara himself, believing her focus on high standards was a strength. Now, he feared that her pride had replaced the store's real purpose, to make every person feel welcome, just as his grandfather had insisted. He took a slow breath and walked across the street. When Arthur pushed the heavy glass door open, a soft chime announced his arrival. Clara's head turned immediately. Her eyes moved from his old hat down his worn coat to his simple leather shoes. A look of complete disapproval tightened her face. She leaned toward a young salesman named Mark, who was standing nearby. Clara whispered something, and Mark smiled an unkind smile. Arthur pretended not to notice. He kept his head down, acting slightly nervous and overwhelmed by the grand store. He felt the humiliation already, a cold feeling in his stomach. He slowly approached the perfume counter, looking at the bright, colorful bottles. He needed to ask for help to see what would happen. He waited patiently for several minutes. Mark and Clara were talking quietly, occasionally looking at him and then looking away. No other employee approached him. Finally, Arthur walked toward Mark. "Excuse me, young man," Arthur said, his voice soft and polite. "I am hoping you can help me." Mark looked at Arthur with an impatient expression. "What is it?" Mark asked. His voice was sharp. "I am looking for a gift," Arthur said. "A warm scarf, perhaps. For my wife. It is her birthday soon." Mark did not move. He looked at Arthur's old coat again. "The scarves are on the 3rd floor," Mark said, pointing toward the back of the store. "But I should warn you, sir, our prices are very high. You might find something more suitable at the market down the street." The insult was clear. Mark was telling him he was too poor to shop at Harrison's. "I understand they are quality items," Arthur replied calmly, though his hands were trembling slightly. "That is why I came here. Could you please just tell me where the elevator is?" Just then, Clara walked over. Her heels clicked loudly on the marble floor, a sound that made other customers turn. "Is there a problem here, Mark?" she asked, ignoring Arthur completely. "This man is—" "Lost," Mark said, his voice full of disrespect. "He is asking for scarves, but I explained our price range." Clara finally turned her cold eyes to Arthur. Her smile did not reach her eyes. "Sir, this is a store for serious clients. We are extremely busy. If you are not here to make a significant purchase, I must ask you to leave. You are making our other customers uncomfortable." Arthur looked around. A woman wearing many expensive jewels was staring at him, and she quickly moved away, as if he carried a disease. The humiliation was sharp and public. I am a customer, Arthur said quietly. I only want to buy a scarf. I will not tell you again, Clara said, her voice low and firm. We will not serve you. You lower the standards of this establishment. Please leave now, or I will be forced to call security and have you removed. Arthur Harrison looked into the eyes of his store manager. He saw no compassion, no respect, and no kindness. He saw only a cold dedication to money and appearances. He had seen everything he needed to see. I understand, Arthur said, his voice barely a whisper. Thank you for your time. I will not be a problem. He turned slowly, his shoulders bent, and walked toward the glass doors. As he left the store, he heard Clara say to Mark, "Good work. We must be strong about keeping those types of people out. They ruin the atmosphere." Arthur walked around the corner of the building, his face pale. The deep sadness was gone, replaced by a cold, firm anger. He was not angry for himself. He was angry for his grandfather's memory and for every customer who had been made to feel small. He reached into the pocket of his old coat and took out his personal telephone. He pressed the speed dial button for his executive assistant. "Helen," he said, his voice no longer weak but full of command. "Cancel my afternoon. I want you to schedule an emergency meeting for the entire executive board and all senior store management in 1 hour. Yes, everyone. Tell them it is a matter of the company's survival." 1 hour later, the main executive boardroom on the top floor was filled with anxious people. Senior managers whispered to one another, their faces confused. An emergency meeting called with only 1 hour of notice was completely unknown at Harrison's Fine Goods. It meant a disaster had happened, perhaps a terrible financial loss or a public scandal. Clara Vance and Mark sat near the back of the room. Clara looked annoyed, not worried. "What a waste of time," she whispered to Mark. "This is probably about the new shipping contracts. It has nothing to do with us on the sales floor." Mark nodded in agreement. "They should just let us do our jobs. Did you see that new shipment of Italian leather bags? I sold 3 in an hour after that old man left." Clara smiled. "Exactly. That is what matters. High sales, high-value clients. Mr. Harrison will be pleased with our numbers this month. We are the most profitable team." They both felt secure, completely unaware of the reason for the meeting. At the front of the room, the door to the private office opened. The executives stopped whispering immediately. They all stood up out of respect. But it was not Arthur Harrison who entered. It was his executive assistant, Helen, a serious woman who had worked for the Harrison family for 30 years. "Mr. Harrison will be joining you in a moment," Helen announced. "He has asked me to play something for you first." Her face was impossible to read. She walked to the large video screen at the front of the room. A quiet, nervous sound filled the air as she pressed a button on a remote control. The screen turned bright, and then the manager saw a video recording. It was footage from the store's own security cameras. The camera was high above the main entrance, showing the perfume counter. The room was silent. They watched as a man in an old coat and hat entered the store. They watched Clara Vance whisper to Mark. They watched the man wait patiently for help. Clara's heart suddenly felt very cold. She recognized the man. Her hand went to her mouth. "That's—" she started to whisper, but Mark grabbed her arm, his face pale. On the screen, they watched the entire event. They saw Arthur approach Mark. They heard the clear audio from the security system. They heard Mark tell Arthur to go to the street market. They heard Clara's own voice, loud and cruel, telling Arthur he was making other customers uncomfortable. They watched her threaten to call security. And finally, they watched the old man, the CEO of the entire company, walk slowly out of his own store. The video ended. No one in the boardroom moved. No one spoke. The only sound was the quiet hum of the air system. The managers looked at the screen, then at Clara and Mark. The faces of the other executives were a mix of shock and complete horror. Clara felt like she could not breathe. Her entire career, her pride, her future, it all disappeared in that single moment. She was looking at her own face on the screen, seeing a bully, not a manager. Mark was shaking, staring at his hands on the table. He could not look up. The side door opened again. This time, Arthur Harrison walked in. He was no longer wearing the old hat and coat. He was wearing his dark blue, perfectly tailored suit and a severe dark tie. His face was not angry. It was deeply, profoundly sad. He walked slowly to the head of the table and stood there, looking at the faces of his most trusted employees. He did not look at Clara or Mark. He looked at everyone else. "My grandfather," Arthur began, his voice quiet but filling the room, "opened this company with one small loan and one simple idea. He believed that every person, rich or poor, deserved to be treated with dignity. He said this store was not just a place to sell things, but a place to give people a moment of beauty and respect in their day." He paused, looking at the large framed photograph of his grandfather that hung on the boardroom wall. "I have, for the past hour, been wondering if I have failed him. I have received letters. I did not want to believe them. I wanted to believe that the people I trusted were carrying on his tradition." He finally turned his eyes toward Clara. Her face was white. "Miss Vance, you have been the manager of my flagship store for 2 years. In that time, our profits from high-value clients have increased by 20%. That is very good. But tell me, what is the cost of that 20%? Today, I learned that the cost is our soul. The cost is the very foundation this company was built on." Clara started to speak. "Mr. Harrison, I did not know. I thought—" "You thought what?" Arthur asked, his voice still quiet. "You thought he was poor? You thought he was not important? You judged a man by his clothes in my store? You taught your staff to do the same?" The room was painfully silent. Arthur Harrison had not finished. Clara Vance stared at Mr. Harrison, her mind empty of excuses. The silence in the room was heavy and complete. Mr. Harrison, I apologize," she finally stammered. "It was a mistake in judgment. I was only trying to protect the store's image." Arthur Harrison looked at her with piercing, sad eyes. "Protect it? Or did you mean protect your sales numbers? You turned away a customer. It does not matter if he was wearing a worn coat or a king's robe. You judged him. You humiliated him. You made him feel worthless. That is not our image. That is a betrayal of our image." He then turned his gaze from Clara to the young salesman, Mark, who looked like he was about to be sick. "And you, young man," Arthur said, his voice softer but just as firm. "You are new here. Who taught you to speak to a customer like that? Who taught you that it is acceptable to send a person to a street market?" Mark was trembling. He looked at Clara, then quickly looked down at the table. He saw his career ending before it had even begun. In his panic, he chose to save himself. It was Manager Vance, sir," Mark said, his voice weak. She trained us. She told us we must qualify our clients. She said our time was valuable and that we should not waste it on people who were just looking or who did not fit the store's profile. I was just following her instructions, sir." "I am so sorry." Clara's head snapped toward Mark, her eyes wide with disbelief and anger. "You coward," she whispered fiercely. "You agreed with me. You laughed." "That is enough." Arthur's voice boomed, and both of them fell silent. The anger was finally visible in his face. "There is no honor in blaming another. You both made your choice. You chose arrogance. You chose cruelty." Arthur walked to the window and looked down at the city below. He saw the cars and the people, all of them potential customers, all of them people his grandfather would have welcomed. "Ms. Vance," he said without turning around, "you are suspended from all duties effective immediately. Mr. Mark, your employment here is terminated." The words were simple, but they landed like stones. Clara gasped, and Mark just sank lower in his chair. "You will both be escorted from the building by security," Arthur continued, turning back to them. "You will leave your key cards and your employee identification with Helen on your way out. You are not to contact any other staff. You are not to return to the sales floor." Two security guards, who had been waiting silently by the door, stepped forward. They moved quietly to stand behind Clara and Mark. The humiliation was now complete, and it was public, just as the humiliation Arthur had suffered had been. The other executives watched, their faces pale, as Clara Vance stood up. Her pride was broken. She said nothing, but tears of anger and shame streamed down her face as she was led from the room. Mark followed, looking like a lost child. The door clicked shut, leaving the remaining managers in a terrible, cold silence. Down on the main sales floor, a young woman named Alara, who worked at the jewelry counter, watched the main elevator. She saw Clara and Mark exit, followed by the two serious security guards. Alara's heart was pounding. She had seen the entire event with the old man in the worn coat. She had wanted to run over and help him. She knew where the scarves were. But she was new, and she was terrified of Clara. She had watched the man leave, and her stomach had hurt with guilt all morning. Now, seeing her cruel manager being forced to leave, Ilara felt a strange mix of fear and quiet relief. Back in the boardroom, Arthur Harrison turned to his remaining team. They all looked at him with nervous anticipation. "This is not the end," Arthur said, his voice heavy with exhaustion. "This is a symptom of a sickness in our company, a sickness I have allowed to grow by not paying attention. The letters from our customers were not wrong." He looked at Helen. "Helen, please activate the store-wide announcement system. Send a message to all staff. Harrison's Fine Goods is closing for the rest of the day, immediately." A murmur of shock went through the room. Closing on a weekday? It would cost millions. "All staff," Arthur commanded, "will report to the Grand Ballroom at 3 o'clock this afternoon. Every single employee. The ones who clean the floors, the ones who stock the shelves, and all of you. We are going to have a conversation about the soul of this company, and we are going to find it again." By 3 o'clock, the Grand Ballroom on the 8th floor was completely full. Hundreds of employees from every department sat in rows of chairs. They wore their company uniforms, the dark blazers of the sales staff, the gray outfits of the cleaning crew, and the black suits of the restaurant workers. The air was thick with confusion and fear. Rumors had moved quickly through the store. A major theft, a sudden bankruptcy, a hostile takeover. No one knew the truth. Ilara, the young woman from the jewelry counter, found a seat near the back. Her heart was beating fast. She kept remembering the face of the old man and the cruel sound of Clara's voice. She saw the executives at the front of the room, all sitting in a line, their faces serious and grim. They looked like they were attending a funeral. A door at the front opened, and the room fell into a heavy silence. Arthur Harrison walked onto the stage. He stood at a simple podium, looking out at the hundreds of faces. He looked older than he had in the boardroom, his face showing the strain of the day. "Good afternoon," he began. His voice was calm and clear, amplified by microphones. "I know you are all confused. I apologize for closing the store so suddenly. I know this has caused worry for many of you. It was not a financial decision. It was a moral one." He paused, letting the words settle. For several weeks, I have been receiving letters. They were not about our prices or our selection. They were about our people. Customers who have shopped here for 50 years wrote to me, saying they no longer felt welcome. They said our store felt cold and our staff felt arrogant. A nervous murmur moved through the crowd. "I did not want to believe it," Arthur continued. "I trust my team. I trust my managers. But I had to know the truth. So this morning, I did something I have not done in 30 years. I visited our store not as your CEO, but as a customer, a very average customer." Ilara felt a sudden, cold realization. Her breath caught in her throat. She stared at Mr. Harrison, truly seeing him for the first time. The man on the stage was the same man from the perfume counter. The kind, sad eyes were the same. It was him. She felt shame wash over her, hot and fast. She had been afraid. She had done nothing. Beside her, other employees began to whisper, sensing what was coming. "I want to show you what I experienced this morning," Arthur said. "I want you to see what our customers are seeing." Behind him, the giant projection screen flickered to life. It was the same security video from the boardroom. The entire staff watched in total, horrified silence. They saw Mr. Harrison, disguised, enter the store. They saw Clara whisper to Mark. They heard Mark's insulting words about the street market. And then they heard Clara, their most powerful manager, threaten the owner of the entire company with security. The collective gasp in the ballroom was loud. People covered their mouths. Some who had worked under Clara looked at the floor, ashamed. They had all seen her do similar things to other, less important customers. Ilara watched her own small figure in the background, standing frozen by the jewelry counter, and she squeezed her hands together, her nails digging into her palms. The video ended. The screen went black. Arthur Harrison stood silent for a long moment, letting the full weight of the scene press down on the room. The two employees in that video, Clara Vance and Mark, are no longer with this company, he announced. His voice was firm. Their actions were a disgrace to everything we stand for. But this is not just about two people. It is about a culture that I allowed to grow, a culture that values sales numbers more than human kindness. And that ends today. He stepped out from behind the podium, walking closer to the edge of the stage, his voice full of a new, strong passion. My grandfather did not build this empire so that his managers could humiliate people. He built it as a place of welcome. From this moment forward, everything changes. We are not just selling goods. We are selling respect. We are providing dignity. Starting tomorrow, he declared, we are launching a new, mandatory training program for every single employee, including every executive. It is called the Harrison Promise. It is not about sales techniques. It is about empathy, respect, and kindness. Furthermore, our employee bonus program will no longer be based only on sales. It will be based on customer feedback, on letters, on comments, on stories of kindness. Ilara looked up, a small spark of hope in her eyes. Arthur's gaze seemed to scan the entire room. This is my promise to you, and it is my promise to the memory of my grandfather. We will be the kindest store in this city. We will treat the person buying a simple scarf with the same respect as the person buying a diamond. If you cannot do that, then this is not the company for you. This store will be a place of warmth again. We will earn back the trust of our customers, one small act of kindness at a time. When Arthur Harrison finished speaking, he simply nodded to the crowd and walked off the stage. For a long moment, the hundreds of employees sat in stunned silence. The video, the firings, the new rules, it was almost too much to understand. Then, slowly, one person in the front row began to clap. It was a soft, hesitant sound. Another person joined, then another. Within 30 seconds, the entire ballroom was filled with loud, sustained applause. It was not just for Mr. Harrison. It was for the change, for the end of the culture of fear that Clara had created, and for the hope of returning to a place of kindness. Employees were looking at each other, many smiling for the first time in months. The heavy weight of judgment had been lifted from the store. In the back row, Ilara clapped until her hands were sore, tears of relief in her eyes. The guilt she had felt was still there, but it was now mixed with a powerful new feeling, determination. She had been a coward. She had watched an injustice happen and had stayed silent because she was afraid for her job. Mr. Harrison's words about empathy and courage had spoken directly to her heart. She knew that the new training program was not enough. The company needed people who truly believed in the new way. When the meeting ended and people began to file out, Ilara did not go back to the jewelry counter. She found a quiet desk in a customer service office, took a piece of Harrison's official stationery, and began to write a letter. She wrote, not as an employee, but as a witness. "Dear Mr. Harrison," she wrote, her hand shaking, "my name is Ilara, and I work at the jewelry counter. I was there this morning. I am the woman in the video who stood by and did nothing. I am writing to you because I am deeply ashamed of myself. I saw you being treated with cruelty and disrespect. I wanted to help you, but I was afraid of Manager Vance. I was afraid I would lose my job. Your speech today made me realize that by staying silent, I was part of the problem. I am so sorry I failed you, and I am sorry I failed the values of this company." She continued, explaining that she loved her job, not for the expensive jewels, but for the moments when she helped people find the perfect, meaningful gift. She finished her letter. "I do not know if I deserve to be part of this new future, but I promise you this. I will never again stay silent when I see someone being treated without kindness. I will be the first to help." She sealed the envelope and gave it to Helen, Mr. Harrison's assistant, asking her to please give it to him personally. Ilara went home that night, certain she would be fired. The next morning, she arrived at work, her stomach in knots. At 10 o'clock, the store telephone on her counter rang. It was Helen. "Mr. Harrison would like to see you in his office, Ilara, right now." Ilara felt her blood run cold. This was it. She took the elevator to the top floor, her hands trembling. She was shown into the vast, beautiful office. Arthur Harrison was standing by the window, holding her letter. "Ilara," he said, turning to her. His voice was not angry. It was kind. "Please, sit down." He walked over and sat opposite her. "I have read your letter," he said, placing it on the desk. "It is, perhaps, the most important letter I have received this year. It took more courage to write this than it takes to sell a diamond. You were not afraid of me. You were honest." Ilara looked at him, confused. "But, sir, I did nothing. I was a coward." Arthur smiled, a genuine, warm smile. "You were afraid. That is human. But then you held yourself responsible. That is character. Clara and Mark blamed each other. You blamed yourself. That, Ilara, is the Harrison promise. It is not just about being kind. It is about being responsible for that kindness." He leaned forward. "I am not firing you, Ilara. I am promoting you. I am creating a new position, Director of Customer Empathy. You will be in charge of the new training program. You will travel to every store. You will tell them your story. You will teach them what you know in your heart, that kindness is not a sales tactic. It is our most valuable product." Ilara stared at him, her mouth open, unable to believe what she was hearing. Her life had just changed completely, all because she chose honesty over fear. 6 months later, Harrison's Fine Goods was a completely different place. The bright, polished glass doors still opened with a soft chime, but the atmosphere inside was no longer cold and severe. It was warm, busy, and filled with the sound of quiet conversations and helpful laughter. The employees no longer stood in stiff, judgmental groups. They moved through the aisles, actively looking for people to help, their smiles genuine. The Harrison Promise was not just a training program, it had become the heart of the store. And the person leading that change was Ilara. She was no longer hidden behind the jewelry counter. Today, she was standing in the grand ballroom, speaking to a class of new employees. Her voice was confident and kind. "My first instinct was to be silent," she told them, her story now a core part of the training. "I was afraid. I thought my job was just to sell jewelry. But I learned that day that my job is to protect our customers' dignity. It is all of our jobs. Never be afraid to be kind. Never be afraid to speak up for someone. Here at Harrison's, kindness is our highest standard." The new employees watched her, their faces open and inspired. They knew her story, and they knew she was proof that character was valued more than sales. After the training, Ilara walked the sales floor. She greeted an older woman in a simple coat, just like Arthur's, and asked, "Are you finding everything you are looking for? Can I help you find the perfect gift?" The woman smiled, her shoulders relaxing, and Ilara guided her personally to the scarf department. Arthur Harrison watched this from the mezzanine. He now walked the floor every single day, not as a test, but because he truly enjoyed it. His employees were no longer afraid of him. They were happy to see him. They shared stories of positive customer interactions. Mr. Harrison, a young man from the shoe department, said, "I just spent an hour with a gentleman who was buying his first ever suit for a job interview. He was so nervous. We found him the perfect one, and I showed him how to tie a tie. He looked so proud." Arthur placed a hand on the young man's shoulder. "That is it. That is exactly what we do here. Thank you." His sadness from that terrible day was gone, replaced by a deep, quiet pride. His grandfather's vision was alive and well. And what of those who had betrayed that vision? Clara Vance learned a hard, painful lesson. After being fired in such a public way, her reputation in the luxury retail world was destroyed. No high-end store would hire her. The arrogance that had been her defining trait was now her greatest prison. After months of unemployment, she was forced to take a job as a cashier at a busy, low-cost supermarket. She stood all day, scanning items, dealing with angry customers, and the pressures of a job she felt was far beneath her. One afternoon, she looked up and saw a woman she used to know, one of her old, wealthy clients from Harrison's. The woman looked right through Clara, as if she was invisible. In that moment, Clara finally understood what it felt like to be judged, humiliated, and dismissed. Mark, the young salesman, fared no better. He was young, but his firing for gross misconduct and customer mistreatment followed him. He could not find another job in sales. He eventually had to move back to his parents' town, his dreams of a big city career in ruins. He often thought about the old man in the coat, realizing that his one moment of casual cruelty, following orders he knew were wrong, had cost him his entire future. In his office on the top floor, Arthur Harrison sat at his desk. But he was not looking at sales reports. He was reading letters. They were handwritten, just like before, but now they were letters of joy. "Dear Mr. Harrison," one read, "I am 90 years old, and I have shopped at your store since I was a girl. For a time, I stopped coming. It felt cold. But today, a wonderful young woman named Ilara helped me, and it felt like coming home. Your grandfather would be so proud." Arthur folded the letter, a smile on his face. He looked up at the portrait of his grandfather on the wall. The store was safe. The legacy was secure. Moral of the story: true success is not measured by the value of your goods, but by the dignity you show to every single person.